Welcome to richplanet.net, the program which aims to uncover the truth behind the alien and UFO mystery. I'm Richard D. Hall, and in this week's program I will be serving up the third installment of the Cayton Files. Right, well, moving on to 1998, the case of the Cheshire Flying Triangles.
Right, this is 1st of June 1997.
Okay.
A pilot called Malcolm Smith, he jointly shares a Jodel light aircraft, and he was on a flight 10 o'clock, half 10 on a lovely sunny morning, 1st of June, with his co-pilot, who didn't want to be named.
Mm-hmm.
And they were flying to North Wales, to Carnarvon Airport. That was their destination.
Mm-hmm.
So they took off and flew north to avoid the Manchester air traffic control area and the Liverpool. So they're heading out to the west coast towards Southport.
Mm-hmm.
So they're only up round St Helens in Lancashire, not far off the East Lancashire Road, which is the A580, at 1,500 feet altitude, 80 knots, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm was at the controls,
Mm-hmm.
and his co-pilot was on the right-hand seat, and he looked down and realised that under the starboard wing
Mm-hmm.
there was a black triangular shadow,
Mm-hmm.
went underneath the wing and undertook them, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
going in their direction
Okay.
at probably twice their speed.
And what sort of size was this shadow, David?
Well, their words were initially, it was filling the size of a small field.
Right.
Okay, unless you were on the ground to know what the field size was, it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But Malcolm actually took me up in his plane later to overfly the same route.
Mm-hmm.
So I took some still pictures
Mm-hmm.
and then did a simulation of a triangle, and it was probably certainly larger than the Avril Vulcan,
Mm-hmm.
which incidentally they both knew were no longer in service, and there was none flying at that time. Even the Air Force weren't flying their demonstrator.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a complete triangle, it was longer towards the point, the direction of flight,
Okay.
but probably 500 feet or more,
Okay.
is a rough guess.
Right.
And they thought they were in a collision position because the image of the shadow, the edges of the shadow on the ground were quite sharply defined, which sort of indicated to them that the shadow, the craft causing the shadow, must be at least around their altitude.
Mm-hmm.
So Malcolm sort of twisting the aircraft about, looking to think, where the heck is it?
Mm-hmm.
Thinking they were in a near-miss situation.
Mm-hmm.
And a bit worried, naturally. We were going to
Mm-hmm.
have a mid-air collision.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no sign at all of a solid craft
Right.
causing this shadow on the ground.
And it couldn't have been a cloud then?
Oh no, there was hardly any clouds in the sky.
Okay.
It was, it was virtually, there was a few bits.
And was this shadow moving, traversing the landscape then? Moving
yes.
at the same speed as them, or was
No,
it?
it was probably twice the speed, so it
Right.
undertook them. It came from under
them,
the
right.
starboard wing, headed in their direction westwards,
Right.
and eventually out of sight.
Okay.
So even when it was going clearly in front of the cockpit,
Mm-hmm.
they did not see the craft now in front of them, as you would expect normally,
Mm-hmm.
since it was overtaking them,
Mm-hmm.
to see the aeroplane, whatever
Yeah.
it might have been,
Okay.
to cause the shadow.
Okay.
So there was an event on the M56 motorway on the same date, but it was like midnight,
Mm-hmm.
of a family of 4 coming back from holiday in North Wales,
Mm-hmm.
and they were at junction 9, which is junction 20 M6, where the M56, the east-west motorway from Wales
Mhm.
to Manchester, crosses the M6 motorway. They saw this, saw some lights as they approached from distance away, thinking it was some lights on a lamp standard or something. And as they, the Seal family, there was a lad, son of 19 and one of 17. The 17-year-old was asleep at first until they woke him up.
Mm-hmm.
And as they crossed over the M6, they realised that there was a triangular black craft hovering quite low over the fields, or there's a farm between the motorway slip roads intersection, which quite shook him up. and he was only doing about 60 miles an hour. He had a fairly oldish car, and he had his luggage and a family of 4, so he was on the inside lane.
Okay.
And this object then moved, came over the top of the car, where they woke up the younger son then, and they all felt this sort of vibration, rumbling sound as it went over the car.
Right.
And it had lights on each corner, red and white, very soft. And then as it went over the car, they saw this sort of palish dome light in the centre.
Right.
It then went to the opposite side of the motorway, now heading in their direction towards Stockport and Manchester.
Right.
Pulling away from them, possibly doing 100 miles an hour or something like that. And then they started to catch it up again.
Right.
It was reducing speed, and also it was lower. It was coming lower, and then it actually disappeared as they were sort of coming up to it behind trees and bushes into the fields.
Okay.
And they were that spooked they didn't decide to stop on the hard shoulder. They carried on.
Right.
And there was other traffic on the motorway because Sunday evening there were people coming back from the weekends in Wales and Anglesey and all the rest of it. So they were keen for other people to come forward.
No.
So I suggested to them that they maybe would they agree to an item in the local Stockport Express
Yes.
to tell the story, and they said we're all right with that, provided my phone number went in the paper, not theirs. They didn't want to be badgered.
Yes.
So and this often happens, I find, with UFO witnesses. They often want, the main driving force is to find other witnesses to make them feel better, like they're not being seeing things and going bananas.
Yeah.
So the Stockport Express did that. They did quite a good coverage on it. I got a call from Angus, just gone Angus something, who was a microlight pilot, and him and his pal were flying back from Cranfield Aerodrome in Bedfordshire 3 weeks later, in July the 6th, I think it was. Again, it was a Sunday, a lovely sunny afternoon. This was about 3:30, 4 o'clock. And they were within the vicinity that Malcolm Smith was earlier, just a bit further up, near St Helens anyway, in a sort of air corridor.
Right.
Chugging along at 50 miles an hour, roughly the same altitude of 1,500 feet. And the shadow of a triangle came the opposite way, it came towards them.
Right.
And went past the microlights, they reckon, possibly doing several hundred miles an hour, possibly even 1,000, fairly fast.
Right.
And he said, I was so gobsmacked, he said, I didn't even press the record button on the GPS to register the exact position where I was when it happened. The speed it was going and the time to turn the microlight around, there was no chance of me flying after it and catching up. But again, just like Malcolm and his co-pilot, they could not see a structured craft presenting the shadow, in this case coming towards them. And this was baffling. So we've got like 4 pilots here who have witnessed this phenomenon, and maybe they're not worried about or hadn't considered the shadow. When they were masking their craft, they perhaps didn't think about the shadow and the sunlight. On a sunny day. I don't know.
And well, presumably, if someone had been standing where the shadow is, then they would have been able to see something. I guess.
Possibly.
So from that angle, it may have been visible. I would have thought. But some people would say, well, the Americans have secret flying triangles, and I mentioned one of these when I spoke to Omar Fowler, called the TR-3B, which is nuclear powered and uses anti-gravity to reduce its weight by up to 90%, and has, well, it uses technology which the military haven't basically told anyone about yet. So, do you think it could be that then, David? A secret American project?
No. I think that's no chance.
No.
Even if there was such a thing, they wouldn't be flying it around, Lancashire in broad daylight. That time of
in Cheshire.
In Cheshire, no.
Yeah, that's exactly what Omar Fowler said.
No,
because he has had many cases of flying triangles in Derby.
Yes, I know.
In the early and mid 90s, I think.
Yeah.
Moving on to the Milton Torres case of, is it 1958?
No, 1957.
1957.
Yeah.
Where this particular story, in my view, reveals something about the actual philosophy and strategy of the MOD and the RAF when dealing with UFOs. So
Yeah.
it was picked up on radar in 1957.
Yes.
So you take it from there, David.
Yes, May 57. This came to light actually in the mid-80s, 1988 I think, because a friend of mine who's a retired solicitor in Manchester called Harry Harris was in London on a refresher course to do with conveyancing to part of his job as a solicitor, and he was eating in a steakhouse down the road from his hotel, and Milton Torres and his wife were over from the States at a reunion event at RAF Manston in Kent, and they were in London doing the usual sightseeing, whatever, and they were in a sort of ex-servicemen's club called the Victory Club, which was cheap accommodation, and they'd chosen to eat at the same steakhouse, and they're in a queue as a carvery type thing, and Harry's behind this lady who turned out to be Milton's wife. Oh, he's a pilot sort of thing. And Harry, being Harry, rightly said, as I think ufologists should do when they talk to pilots, oh, I wonder if he's ever seen a UFO.
Right.
And she said, oh, he's not just seen a UFO, he was ordered to shoot one down. And now he was, I think, was at the table waiting, he wasn't actually in the queue. And they sat down and discussed it, and Milton Torres told Harry the full story. And, I'd heard Milton talking to Harry over the phone in his office in Sale, in his solicitor's office, and Harry recorded the conversation.
What year was that?
And that was 94.
Right.
94, yes. And then Milton sent to Harry a written version of what he said on the phone to back it up.
And at this point, really, Milton was probably breaking his official secrets, oath. Yeah,
his oath, yes, I guess so, yes.
By sharing it with Harry Harris.
Yeah,
okay.
But he had shared it with other people in the past.
Okay. And just to touch on Milton Torres's background, because he's a pretty clever guy, isn't he?
Yes,
he holds patents for aircraft components and things like that.
Yes, he did. Yes, he ended up as a professor of I think mechanical engineering at the University of Florida. But he served in Vietnam and did some very dangerous, dodgy things there apparently. But when he was at RAF Manston in 1957, he was a young lieutenant flying Super Sabre F-86Ds. And on this particular occasion, he was on what they call a QRA standby, that's Quick Reaction Alert, which is what we had in the Cold War. So they were parked out on the end of the runway at Manston. They have a little cabin there with the rest cabin, the power on the aircraft ready to roll. And him and his wingman got the order to take off. And he said on his RT, on his radio, they were informed that they were actually chasing a bogey. They have all sorts of terminologies for UFOs.
The Air Force's term for an unidentified flying object.
There's various terms.
Okay.
Yeah. So he knew the target was certainly not a Russian aircraft intruding into our airspace.
Right.
And this object had been on radar some considerable time prior to the order to take off. It was very large, it was a huge reflection, and it was making very strange manoeuvres over Ipswich area, which of course is down the road from Rendlesham Forest, which is rather interesting in itself. And it was stationary at times as well, as they do. They stop and they make these peculiar gyrations. So the authorities, the British Royal Air Force radar folk, knew damn well that was unidentified when they scrambled Milton and his wingman to intercept it. By the time he got airborne, he was vectored to the position at 32,000 feet. It was daylight when he took off, and then darkness fell, so he was flying blind. So anyway, when Milton got out to sea, very quickly he was in touch on the RT to RAF Bordsea, which was the GCI ground control instruction place, and he very quickly got his own radar target on his cockpit radar, and his weapons systems linked to a little mini computer, very old-fashioned these days, I suppose. But he said he'd never had such a fantastic large lock-on, and this reflection was, his words, burning a hole in his scope in the cockpit. So he had no problem in finding the target, and locking on to lock the weapon system on. What really shook him up and spooked him, and he said in his testimony, I almost shit my pants when he got this coded order to fire.
Yeah.
And he had on his flying suit little things he had to try and read because he had lights down with a flashlight.
Yeah.
And he challenged the order. He was that shocked and uncertain that he'd heard correctly. He challenged it, and they confirmed he was to launch his weapons.
Okay.
And over his RT, he was hearing similar air traffic chat between his wingman, who he believed to be Dave Roberson at the time. Although there's some doubt about that now, but that doesn't matter. Anyway, he got to within a range of 10 miles and locked all the systems, or sort of lock itself on, and the spot was in the centre of the scope, I suppose. And he was within, I think, 10 seconds of launching the 42 Mighty Mouse missiles, and he noticed on the scope that the object, the target, was leaving, going vertically off, and accelerating away from him. And they told him right from base one to keep his afterburner on, which of course burns a lot of fuel. So he was on, I think, a Mach .98 or something.
Right.
9.2 maybe it was, 9.2,
right.
Words I don't know. But it was flat out.
Yeah,
the Super Sabre flat out at, I don't know.
About 700 miles an hour.
Yeah, just under 700 miles an hour.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
And he said this thing, this target, he knew was leaving at Mach 10. So we're talking like 7,500 miles an hour.
Right.
It was accelerating away from him. So he never actually fired the weapons.
Okay.
And I guess his wingman didn't either. So he was told by GCI to return to base, or what they called home plate, was the term they used, and he would be debriefed on the ground later. And a gentleman, American chap, not in uniform, came up from, he believed, the American embassy, and he's sure Milton Torres, this chap was from the NSA, the National Security Agency, and he interviewed him and his wingman separately and emphasised that this was a classified mission material and he must not talk to anybody about it, not even the station commander. And
who may have not had the need to know.
Yes, that's right. It wasn't in the loop, so
yeah.
That's what they do. They sort of keep it in the small compartments, the information,
Yeah.
and the less people that know about it, the better. But what intrigued me, particularly being ex-Air Force, was Milton was adamant and absolutely sure that he was under the direction and control of the Royal Air Force, the MOD, because they were acting under what they call CNR system, control and report system, which rotated between different branches of our Air Force and the American visitors we had on bases over here to protect certain regions of the United Kingdom. So the orders to fire did not come from the Americans because they are not. So I was keen, being ex-Air Force, to find out the system, the chain of command, if you like, who had ordered these two USAF pilots to launch full salvo of 42 Mighty Mouse missiles, or the Aeromite missiles they were called, which are slung underneath the F-86D at this object. Because again, we're in Cold War days, they wouldn't lightly be firing weapons at an aircraft they believed to be Russian, because we could trigger World War III, it's a very sensitive, delicate situation.
Yes.
So it's not something to take lightly.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to just look at the actual chain of command from where Milton Torres got his orders from. Where does it start, David?
We would start, I guess, from their on-site reports. It would feed back up first to the headquarters, the Air Defence Operational Centre, Command Centre, which was the old Fighter Command, and that was at RAF Bentley Priory, which is near Stanmore, north of London. And then they would have considered the executive order, what I guess would have come from high level, and gone through Kelvin Hatch, which was the Sector Operational Command Centre, which Milton referred to as the Met Sector, which was this secret underground Cold War bunker in Essex. And then they would feed that order to the GCI Centre on the coast of Suffolk at Bordsey Manor, who were in radio contact with the pilots in the plane. So there would be 3 particular units involved, but the decision to fire would have come from fighter headquarters at Bentley Priory.
Okay.
Because that's a big decision to make, and it's not just the politics of it and the risks. There's the expense. I mean, they're going to fire off a lot of expensive ordnance at an unidentified object, not of this earth. I mean, that is not something you take lightly.
You say that they haven't released much information on this case.
No.
So what have the MOD put in the in the files?
Yeah. What the irony is, the only reason this has come out is because they had correspondence on file from the mid-80s, partly from Harry Harris, bless his heart, who had written badgering the MOD for information, usually getting the usual bland letters, you know, about defence significance and all this rubbish. But there's not a single document that's been released last autumn, on all that batch of files, which clearly says that the Royal Air Force, the British Ministry of Defence, backed up and authorised 2 American pilots to fire all these missiles at an unidentified flying object.
Right.
So, but people are under this impression that it's all fully in the open, but it isn't.
Right.
And I don't think they will ever admit, even if there's documents around these days, who it was at fighter headquarters or actually gave the executive order, you know, would probably be at Air Commodore level or even higher, to fire.
And we can speculate that there's probably been other instances like this which are just completely kept out of the files that have been released.
Yes.
And I would even suggest that the only reason why they've even alluded to it in the files is because Torres told his story to Harry Harris all those years ago. Would you go along with that? Possibly.
On the Daily Star newspaper in 1991, and there was this ex-Air Force sergeant who's into Super Sabres, which appeared in Dr. David Clarke's and Andy Roberts' book, Out of the Shadows. And what I found extremely ironic, when I filed my FOIA, the gentleman from Air Branch B2, funnily enough, was actually based at Bentley Priory, was quoting me a particular page out of their book where Clarke and Roberts had made reference to Milton Torres. And that seemed to be the sum total of information that the Air Historical Branch had.
Right.
Which doesn't surprise me, because the real truth, the real secret documents have probably all been destroyed, or from the 1950s, or they're locked away somewhere, and lots of other stuff. So it's sort of trickled out, this case. It's trickled out.
Okay, and if we can just talk about the broader philosophical significance of such a decision. So there's an object in the sky, which is large, which is manoeuvring in a way that tells them that it's not a man-made item. So it might contain some kind of intelligent beings from another world, who knows. But their philosophy is to try and kill it, or catch it, or destroy it on first sight. Now to me, I'm no pacifist, right? But to me, imagine if they had the same philosophy. Another civilization coming together and meeting our craft for the first time, you would have just, you would end up in destruction. So I would argue that how can that possibly be a valid or a moral strategy for the military to have? I mean, what are your ex-military, what are your comments on what I'm actually saying there?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. It would be a really risky enterprise, because the retaliation could be catastrophic for us. And in fact, in the 1950s, in 1952, the US President at the time, President Harry Truman, authorised his Air Force to fire. There'd been a lot of UFOs over Capitol Building in 52, which caused a big media furore and a lot of witnesses, and there'd been a number of events. So they were ordered to fire weapons, you know, on intercepts with them, and they'd lost quite a few planes and pilots in the process. And this order was rescinded within 24 hours or so, and also scientists, including Albert Einstein, had written to the White House objecting to this antagonistic, dangerous order on the grounds of global preservation and peace and all the rest of it.
Yes.
And they'd lost a lot of pilots, and so when they have gone into attack, it's been catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
If those rockets had actually hit the target that Milton was firing at, they would have finished him off, and he
Yes.
wouldn't have been returning to base.
Mm-hmm. And that has happened in other cases
It
as
has,
well.
yes.
If you look
Like
at Timothy Good's books.
Yes, there's been many cases like that. So
The arrogance, I would suggest, and the ignorance of the people at the end of the chain of command, as you describe it, is, to me, is incredible.
yes, breathtaking, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm sad to say that this is the last programme of Series 4, but do look out for more programmes from richplanet.net on this channel and on the website. Welcome to richplanet.net, the programme which aims to uncover the truth.
To overfly the same route.
Mm-hmm.
So I took some still pictures
Mm-hmm.
and then did a simulation of a triangle, and it was probably certainly larger than the Avril Vulcan,
Mm-hmm.
which incidentally they both knew were no longer in service, and there was none flying at that time. Even the Air Force weren't flying their demonstrator.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a complete triangle, it was longer towards the point, the direction of flight,
Okay.
but probably 500 feet or more,
Okay.
as a rough guess.
Truth behind the alien and UFO mystery. I'm Richard D. Hall, and in this week's programme I will be serving up the third instalment of the Cayton Files. Right, well, moving on to 1998, the case of the Cheshire Flying Triangles.
Right, this is 1st of June 1997.
Okay.
A pilot called Malcolm Smith, he jointly shares a Jodel light aircraft, and he was on a flight 10 o'clock controls, and his co-pilot was on the right hand seat, and he looked down and realised that under the starboard wing there was a black triangular shadow went underneath the wing and undertook them, if you like, going in their direction at probably twice their speed.
And what sort of size was this shadow, David?
Well, their words were initially, it was filling the size of a small field.
Right.
Okay, unless you were on the ground to know what the field size was, it's difficult. But Malcolm actually took me up in his plane later, 10:30 on a lovely sunny morning, 1st of June, with his co-pilot, who didn't want to be named. And they were flying to North Wales, to Carnarvon Airport. That was their destination. So they took off and flew north to avoid the Manchester air traffic control area and Liverpool. So they're heading out to the west coast towards Southport. So they're only up round St Helens in Lancashire, not far off the East Lancashire Road, which is the A580, at 1,500 feet altitude, 80 knots or something like that. Malcolm was at the